That reminds me of this thing that Efron said once. Zac Efron, he was doing Baywatch, and he looked great in Baywatch. But he said it was the most miserable he'd ever been in his life because almost the entire movie he was shirtless, and that means that you have to dehydrate, like you say. So he felt like crap the entire time, right? He thought he was going to die.
Hi, I'm Jeremiah. Welcome to the Wake Up Call podcast, where we talk all things sleep, wellness, and health. The Wake Up Call podcast is brought to you by Polysleep, the best memory foam mattress in Canada. Welcome to the Wake Up Call. I'm super excited to be joined today by Chris Bumbray. Chris is a film critic at CTV. He's also the editor-in-chief at joblo.com. And today we're going to talk about the dark side of being famous.
Not that I would know.
Right? But you know a lot of people who have to deal with it.
Sure.
And that's what I'm super excited to talk about. So thank you for joining me. And I want to jump right into it because you've seen firsthand the ins and outs of being an actor, being on this very prestigious scene, which is Hollywood.
Sure.
One thing we don't necessarily know about is it's a very complex industry to get in. It's an industry that is ruthless. What attracts you there? Because it's a tough industry. What brought you to be so interested about it to make it a career?
Well, I mean, for me, it was just a passion in film, basically. I grew up, idolizing actors and actresses and directors and, watching movies constantly. And, it was a different era too. I mean, if you think about it nowadays, young people, when they're growing up, they have streaming and they have so many different choices, right? For me, we had cable TV. So there was like a basic, there was just a limited number of things that were available. So when something was available, you didn't dismiss it, right? You watched it, and that exposed me to a whole variety of different types of films. And, and I just became obsessed over the years, right? When I was in university, I was studying journalism, and I was lucky enough to get a job with Paramount Pictures, which was, it's a pretty big studio, and they were looking for Montreal marketing representatives. So I was a student. I used to take around 35 millimeter prints of movies sometimes to show, and I would show the movies over and over and over again. Every weekend I had to go to the movie theater and watch the trailers and take notes about how the audience was reacting to the trailers and fax them. That's how long it was to go to the studio. And after that, I started working in the media and always kind of reviewed movies on the side, and then it eventually just kind of blossomed into a career, right? I mean, I love journalism, and I love movies, bring them together, and things worked out. Amazing. But like you said, it's a strange industry, that's for sure.
Yeah, definitely not cut for everybody.
No, and I mean it's and it gets harder progressively to make a living in it at times. I mean, I've been very lucky that I've been able to have a decent career in the field, and it's quite the ride.
I can imagine, both on the critique side, but even for actors, right? So,
well, I mean, even more so for actors. So
if you were to tell me, like, from an actor perspective, what, in your opinion, would be the biggest downside of being famous?
Well, there's fame, and fame is one thing, right? I mean, I think the thing about, and then there's also opportunity, whether or not you get opportunity, whether or not you get jobs, which I think is what, 99.9% of actors struggle with. But I could say this for the people that I've met that are famous, one of the things that would be a downside, in my opinion, would be that there's this level of familiarity that everybody feels with you, right? When you're famous, they think they know you, but they don't know you, right? And, you go in and you have, whenever I meet one of them, I interview them. I interviewed Eddie Murphy not long ago, and I grew up, idolizing Eddie Murphy. Felt like I knew Eddie Murphy, but I've never met Eddie Murphy before in my life, right? And they're able to turn it on. They're able to turn on the charm, and they make you feel like, wow, you're super important, and you're the only person in the world, right? But that's a craft that they've studied for years. But if they're not on their game, if they're even slightly off, they're criticized like to the nth degree, right? I mean, a good example is what's happening with Blake Lively now, where they're digging up these old clips, when she was pregnant, and ready to give birth, and oh, she didn't answer this question as bubbly and as light as she could have, Probably the journalist beforehand was told not to ask her about certain things and asked her anyway, because that's a lot of them do that. So they get criticized like over and over and over again, for not being perfect all of the time. And I don't know about you, but I'm certainly not perfect all the time. And if you were to catch me on a bad day, I certainly, I'd be but they can't be that. They don't have that luxury, because any small mistake they make is under the microscope for everybody to see, right?
They have to be on their A game.
Oh, all the time,
24/7.
and in their personal life too. So I mean, even just getting into the orbit of a famous person and being friends with them. I mean, there's a high level of trust there, and how many people have gotten backstabbed from that? Like even in their personal life, they have to be perfect these days. It certainly didn't used to be that case, but that's how it is now. It seems.
How do busy schedule and that level of pressure in their environment is sustainable? How do they manage that?
Well, I mean, I think that their lives are highly organized, right? I mean, if you look a couple of years ago, Mark Wahlberg, for instance, he actually put up his daily schedule, right? And his daily schedule was insane. He wakes up at 2:30 in the morning, works out for an hour and a half. He's religious. He goes to church. Then he spends a couple hours with his family, brings his kids to school, goes to film, gets home in bed every night around 10 o'clock, sleeps about 4.5 hours a night. And I think that is the reality for a lot of these people because it's a highly compartmentalized lifestyle. And I think that that's something that, you learn when you're on the job. Right. And I mean, even, I would say for me, when I'm working, I get a glimpse into that kind of schedule and it's grueling at times, like if I do a junket in Los Angeles or something like that, if they're paying for it, the studio, they're not going to bring you out there for a week. You're going to go out there for one day. So you fly in on the Monday morning, you go to the premiere in the evening, you do your interviews the Tuesday, and you're out by the Tuesday night. And this is kind of how it goes, and it's it's something to adjust to. And sleep, for let's just say, sleep is not always a big part of it.
And I was about to ask you that.
Mm-hmm.
We've all heard about
Mm-hmm.
rehab,
Mm-hmm.
depression,
Mm-hmm.
mental exhaustion.
Mm-hmm.
They push it to the limit and
Yeah.
further. Is that part of it? Is that part of the game? Is that a risk you're willing to take when you're an actor because you're in this 0.001%? You're in like crème de la crème and you have to deal with it.
I guess so. But I mean, the thing about, rehab and drugs and things like that is just something that creeps up on you, I think, over time, and I would imagine that none of them get into that thinking, oh, I'm going to be a drug addict one day and I'm going to go to rehab. I mean, it's kind of glamorized to a certain extent because, every bad boy in Hollywood has been to rehab, right? No, I mean, I think that it's a pressure cooker, and it gets to you after a while. And, and people go to rehab not only for drugs and stuff like that, but for, the fact that they have to be people pleasers 24/7. And being a people pleaser is a tough job.
Yeah, that high visibility
Mm-hmm.
must take a toll on you because you can't just walk in the street and
No,
say
you can't. You can't just walk in the street and just walk down the street and be anonymous. You can't do that, right? Somebody's always going to recognize you. I'll never forget when I was at TIFF a couple of years ago. I was walking down the street with a buddy of mine, and we ran into Michael Fassbender was walking past us, and you can't help but have that moment where you're like, oh, hey, it's Michael Fassbender, right? That look of recognition in our faces. And as we're walking by him, we get both sense. If you look at his face, he like kind of stops and looks at us because he's sure that we're going to stop him and we say, hey, Michael Fassbender. We didn't, because we were like, oh, the guy's, he's doing his own thing, And then as we walked by him, you could see the sense of relief on his face because he didn't have to be on, right? And I think it's difficult, I remember I was at a premiere, Liev Schreiber was on his cell phone and he was having like a really like intense talk with somebody, and somebody just came up to him and they said, hey, can I get a photo with you? Despite the fact that he was on the phone, probably to his wife or something like that. And he's like, sure. Yeah. And he did. And he basically had to serve those people for X amount of time because if he had told them to get lost because he was on his phone, who knows where that's going to end up. I remember I saw a thing with Anthony Mackie the other day. He was driving his truck around. He went to the gas station. Somebody came up to him, filming him on TikTok, and like, hey, let's have your autograph. Anthony is like, sorry, I'm kind of busy. And then he got attacked for that. And that's 24/7 too. Like that doesn't stop, right? People would be recognizing you constantly. And I would imagine that gets to people. But then again, they get access to stuff that you and I would never, we couldn't even dream of. The lifestyle that they have is insane.
Before we jump into the lifestyle, I got to ask you a question. We've all heard the story of people working on sets that think there's this amazing actor, but he turns out to be the biggest d***.
Mm-hmm.
He have a terrible temper.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think it's a facade? Do you think just some actors are just terrible people and just great in front of a camera? Or is it through time, it just grinds you out?
It depends. I mean, I think that it's a little bit of both, right? I mean, if you meet 10 people, the two of them are probably going to be assholes and then the rest of them are going to be nice, and for the most part, when I've met celebrities, even though, I've done it as a journalist, so it's different, right? They're on when they meet me. They've always been, they've always seemed pretty genuine. but there are some of them that aren't, you know.
Tell me a story about the one that surprised you the most.
Well, I can't name names because
Okay.
this would, you know, it would be unprofessional of me to do that. But there was one guy that I asked the question to, and he was a total prick. And, you know, and this guy is well known as being a jerk in the industry, and it goes around and around and around. And you know, you get a reputation, but the guy's career also is on the skids these days. So I think that, you know, if you are that way, I don't think that you last very long in the industry anymore. Certainly didn't used to be the case, you know, where you could have these, you know, these huge stars that were so isolated and insulated that they could do whatever they wanted. I think nowadays it's just not like that anymore. So I think, you know, that's an additional pressure. You have to be a nice person to some extent, right?
24/7.
Yeah, We're not always nice all the time. I also think it probably does grind you down after a while. You know, you're doing the work, you're being told you've got to be this, you got to be sexy, right? That's the thing too. You got to look perfect all the time, you know. You don't have the luxury of going bald. You know, you don't have the luxury of having bags under your eyes. You don't have the luxury of not going to the gym every day, you know, or having a period in your life where you're not 100% perfect, right? You're not perfect all the time. And I think that definitely gets to people. And I mean, I imagine the body image dysmorphia must be completely insane.
Talking about that, what do you think social media, or how bad did it make it?
Well, I think it's made it worse because nowadays social media, people think that they know people even more. But I think that it's good in some ways too. Like for instance, a good example of that is, you know, Sydney Sweeney, right, from Euphoria, young actress, comes from, you know, lower middle class or something. And she posts quite a bit, and she does a lot of these branded content posts where you get paid for it. And people criticize her for it. And it's like, look, you know, I don't know how long this is going to last for. She's hot one moment, she could be cold the next. I mean, if you look at, you know, how the industry has kind of ground people up and spat them out after a while, after they've reached their you know, sell by date, you know, by which is a sad thing to say. Who could fault her for taking advantage? Because who knows how long things are going to last? How many big movie stars have you seen that have had their moment and then suddenly are nowhere? Yeah, I saw a video this morning about Armie Hammer, who has to sell his truck because he can't afford gas anymore. Right? I mean, he was canceled. It's a little bit different. Wow. You know, there were extenuating circumstances there, but like, you know, so I think social media in some ways has helped people build their own brand in some ways and give them more control over their finances and the types of money that they could make. But I also think it's let fans in to such an extreme degree that they feel like everybody feels like they know them.
Again, that just adds up to the pressure they have to deal with.
And you have to be perfect all the time, you know, and one bad post could destroy your career.
You're right. And just being here for an hour, the amount of energy it takes, I can't imagine having to do that 24/7. Going out from a coffee, from a supper, and you had a couple of glasses of wine, and a randos just stops you to have an autograph. Yeah, I would totally lose it sometimes.
I mean, not only that, but think of it this way too. So we're doing a a podcast right now. It's going to go on YouTube. People are going to see it. What if one of us said the wrong thing? Okay, said something really bad. As a host, would you use it? If I was, let's say I wasn't, you know, I'm a nobody, but let's say you're sitting across from Leonardo DiCaprio. Okay. Yeah. Certainly not Leonardo DiCaprio, but let's say he goes way off script and says something completely insane. What are you going to do? Are you going to use it or you're not going to use it? Because if you use it, everybody's going to see it and it's going to give you an amazing amount of traffic. It's going to get your brand out there. It's going to get your name out there, but it's going to hurt him. Would you use it? That's the pressure that they live under all the time. And you need to be perfect.
True.
You can't make a mistake because it'll come back and it'll haunt you.
Now we're going to have this troll in the comments for sure.
Yeah.
We're going to have to live with it. Can you think of a specific moment that really, where you saw an actor really going downhill to a point where people around him should have raised a flag? Yeah. And I think millennial can totally think about Britney Spears or Heath Ledger. Yeah. It went just too far too quickly. And have you seen that firsthand? And what do you think would be the root cause of this?
There was an actor, I don't know if you ever heard of him. His name was Emil Hirsch. Have you ever heard of this guy? He was Speed Racer. He was a hot up-and-coming actor for a while, and he's kind of nowhere now. So there was a party that he went to, and when he was at the party, he got drunk and he assaulted a woman, and he ended up going to jail for it. Not for a long time. I was invited to that party, and I didn't go because I was too tired. right? So it would have been one of those things. It was at Sundance and I was exhausted, but you see that kind of, it's open bar, everybody's free, have as much as you want, much booze as you want, as much drugs as you want, not in my case, I don't get access to that, but certainly get access to the booze. I think it encourages to some extent that kind of lifestyle, right? That recklessness, which is something that these people definitely cannot afford to be. The one thing I'll remember though is a friend of mine was at Sundance and saw Philip Seymour Hoffman, and Philip Seymour Hoffman at the time had fallen back into heroin use, pretty hardcore, right? And he looked like crap. And he'd known him a little bit because he'd interviewed him a few times. And he said, "How you doing?" And he goes, he said something to him that was, pretty crazy. And he was dead 2 weeks later of heroin overdose. And he saw it, and he saw and everybody could see that this guy was going downhill. I mean, he looked terrible. At the festival, he looked awful, and nobody said anything because there was money to be made. There was movies to be promoted. And, what can you do?
Yeah. And it's so hard sometimes.
The machine's got to go. The machine's got to keep going.
Yeah, because it's a rat race. Someone's going to take over.
Yeah, of course.
If you're not.
Yeah, of course. And he was a great actor too. He was an amazing actor. He was very talented, but he had his demons and he was going downhill. And I think a lot of people could see that. But then what do you do? Like he was also, he was shooting the Hunger Games at the time. What do you do if he needs to go to rehab? You still have half the movie to shoot. The thing is the insurance companies come in and then you can't get another job again afterwards.
It can alter your career forever.
100%. So what are you going to do? Usually what people do is they plow through and they take as many drugs as they need to keep going. I remember hearing something crazy about Owen Wilson years ago when he was shooting Marley and Me. Apparently he was in terrible shape. And, it was another one of those things where like the locomotive's got to keep going, right? And he was able to come out of it, thank God. But, it happens to a lot of people.
They squeeze the lemon.
They squeeze the lemon too much. There's only so much juice.
But sometimes that's a question,
Sure.
Does the squeeze worth, does the juice worth the squeeze sometimes?
But, you can't tell though. Then you see them on the big screen and you can't necessarily tell.
Absolutely.
Philip Seymour Hoffman, I remember his last couple of performances. I mean, he gave great performances still, so that was the thing. It wasn't like the talent had just gone away,
It's the toll on the body, the psyche, everything else. That's
somebody like, Ben Affleck's a great example too. People have been following his ups and his downs in real time, and it's become this kind of spectator sport, which is kind of sickening too, because this is, a person after all, right?
It is.
But imagine your divorce becomes front page news around the world. That would wear kind of thin after a while, wouldn't it?
I think so.
You're outside, you're not having a good day, you're having a cigarette, and that becomes a meme that's shared millions and millions and millions of times. I mean, it's a messed up world. It's a tough life.
It is. And like you said, social media just scale it and blew it out of proportion so fast.
And somebody could be filming you and they could put it up online.
Let's not take an example that's maybe not as hardcore as that, but let's say you're on set, it's been a week, you probably don't sleep well, or a normal human being wouldn't. Do they have access to better treatment? They're with IVs, they have like doctors. So what do they have access to? I'm just so curious.
A good example, I was doing the junket for this big Netflix movie. Okay. I hadn't slept much. We were out partying the whole night before. There was some drinking involved. We get makeup sometimes when we do these junkets, thank God. And I was going to get my makeup down and I was like, God, I'm so tired. And then the woman who was doing my makeup, she goes, oh, you just go by the wellness suite. So I went by the wellness suite and, got a vitamin B12 shot and they were doing IVs for everybody. I didn't take the IV, but I took the vitamin B12 shot and it was free. They were giving it to everybody. And, you take one of those things and it gives you pep, and they're relatively healthy. I think a vitamin B12 shot's not going to hurt you. It's not like getting amphetamines back in the day. But I felt much better after getting it. Maybe part of it was psychosomatic. So they get access to things like that and they have wellness coaches and they've got, I'm sure that, these people know that like you said, you can only squeeze so much juice, right? And that eventually it's going to run dry. So I would think that most of them, the ones that have had long careers, know how to take care of themselves and know how to practice self-care.
It's about flirting with the limits.
Yeah, not going overboard. And I mean, you have periods where you don't get much sleep, I'm going to TIFF next week and they're doing like, they have screenings that go until midnight. Then they do Q&As afterwards and they go to like 3 a.m. and then they're doing junkets the next morning or they're showing up at screenings the next morning. Obviously you're not going to get much sleep, but it's a limited time thing, right? And then you recover from it afterwards.
It's very close to what athletes have to go through before, let's say, a fight.
Yeah.
They're going to have to dehydrate. They're going to have to make the weight. They're going to have a series of 10 interviews. and the fight is going to happen on a night in another country at midnight.
Yeah, that reminds me of this thing that Efron said once. Zac Efron, he was doing Baywatch, and he looked great in Baywatch, but he said it was the most miserable he'd ever been in his life because almost the entire movie he was shirtless, and that means that you have to dehydrate, like you say. So he felt like crap the entire time, right? He thought he was going to die. You know, he looked great on screen, but he felt terrible. You know, and people don't realize that, and that's another thing of it too, that kind of body is not the kind of body that anybody really has, right? Even a guy like that doesn't have a body like that. He has to take all these things.
To be at 10% body fat and keeping it there? Oh.
No. I mean, as Stallone, I remember reading like he went down to like 8% body fat for like Rocky 3 or something like that. And he was like, even a guy like him could never sustain it. It's impossible.
To be entirely honest, I'm still amazed, and I love both of them, that Stallone and Schwarzenegger are still alive and kicking the way they are. It's a miracle.
Yeah, but I mean, Stallone, though, also, you know, when he takes his shirt off in a movie, there's some preparation for that too, right? Some of these photos that you put out are, you know, very staged in some ways. I mean, I remember seeing something, Jason Momoa, somebody put out a photo of him that they snapped of him at the beach, and they said, "Oh my God, Aquaman's got a dad bod," and they didn't realize that, you know, he's probably in much better shape like that than he would be on the screen with like a 12-pack. Right? He's probably a lot healthier with his dad bod.
Definitely.
You know? And it was just because he didn't, you know, cut weight for a couple of days beforehand. A guy like The Rock, I don't understand how he does it too. He's in his 50s and look how shredded he is. Like, I don't get it. Dave Bautista is a good example. He was in the MMA wrestler and stuff, and he was always known for being big. But if you look at him now, he's really, really, really scaled down because he's middle-aged and he just can't do it anymore. So, you know, you can't pack on the calories like he used to. He's not going to be Drax anymore with his shirt off. He just can't do it. You know, you have to be realistic about what your body can do and the limits that it can go to.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right on that. And I tend to agree that people tend to look up at these celebrities thinking that is a figure of health.
Yeah.
Often it's not.
No, not at all. And they'd be the first to admit it too.
So Chris, every episode, we take questions from the public, the audience, whether it's comments, email. And a funny question, I was not expecting this one, is about actors and sleep apnea.
Okay, yeah.
And is it something you've been exposed to? Do you know actors that have to deal with this issue and traveling all the time and all that? How do they deal with it? Do they have like special tricks, or they bring their CPAP machine with them?
I've never spent a night with a celebrity, so I don't know if they've had sleep apnea, that's for sure. But I have, you know, us critics, we all kind of band together and stay in the same houses. And I know that I've spent nights with many critics that have sleep apnea. And yeah, I mean, that could be one of my best friends has sleep apnea, and he's a critic, and he comes along to these things and he brings the CPAP with him. You know, William Shatner famously has sleep apnea, has done all kinds of ads for CPAP. I think it's probably pretty common. I mean, I think a lot of people have it. So I would imagine that a lot of celebrities have it too, because I think it's not necessarily just the thing that you can cure, you know?
It's not, and it's great to bring awareness to it. You know, there's still a bit of a stigma. You
know, people seem to think that you only get sleep apnea if you're out of shape, and that's just not the case. I remember there was the actor that starred in this movie, Darkness Falls, like 20 years ago. He was a young guy, up and coming guy, great shape, and he died from sleep apnea. You know, very rare, but it happened, and he was young, in shape, and just one of those things. He had never gotten it. He'd never gotten it checked. You know, and who knows? You know, it is like you say, it's stigmatized, but it shouldn't necessarily be stigmatized.
You're right. You're absolutely right.
It's like diabetes. You know, Halle Berry has diabetes. You know, and you wouldn't think, you wouldn't think, you know, wow, why would Halle Berry have diabetes? But she does.
That's incredible. I would have never thought.
Yeah.
Wow, she looks like the figure of health.
And she is the figure of health, but she has diabetes, and that happens sometimes. Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah.
You're right.
Tom Hanks has diabetes. Tom Hanks has diabetes, though, because he cut weight and gained weight and cut weight and gained weight so much. Probably somebody like Christian Bale has it, too, because I think that's very unhealthy, what they did.
That's true. Yeah. Christian Bale had to put a lot of weight for certain movies and
over and over again. Or, I mean, you know, Russell Crowe put on weight for that Roger Ailes movie, and he's never been able to lose it. Because you do it like 50 and 60. It's not as easy to cut it as it is when you're 25, 30.
Your metabolism is not able to process that
changes
much.
Your body, and you can't always change it back. And then a guy like him gets mocked because he doesn't look like he did 20 years ago in Gladiator. You know, which is crazy. Which is kind of crazy, yeah.
Which is totally crazy. Mm-hmm. Wow. Chris, thank you so much for being with me today and participating in the wake-up call. I'm really looking forward to see what the audience is going to have to say about it. I enjoyed my conversation so much.
No, thank you
so much for sharing all these details with us today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the wake-up call. If you liked what you heard today, do not forget to rate, follow, subscribe, or perhaps leave a comment below. New episode of The Wake Up Call drops on the third Wednesday every month. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss a single episode. For all of us here at the Polysleep studio, I'm Jeremiah Curvers. Until next time.